so when I'm working with students, I am trying to do two things. I'm trying to make sure that they get good levels of performance when they're playing golf, but I'm also trying to make sure that they're disciplining themselves enough to practice well to make necessary swing changes. So we're all pretty much defined by our technique. Your technique will determine how far you can hit the golf ball to a degree. It'll determine how consistent you obviously are, which will therefore make golf obviously much, much easier. The better your technique, the more repeatable you are, the likelihood is that you're going to progress. If you have technical deficiencies, the likelihood is that you'll see more inconsistency with your game. However, like I say, when I'm working with golfers, I'm trying to keep one eye on this idea of, well, if I'm working with this golfer for a few months, they can't just spend their time always working on technique. We also need to make sure that they know how to get around the golf course in the interim. And this is where I get a lot of questions about sort of tips and tricks, and I think they have a place. Okay, so when you watch a YouTube video about a tip and a trick and do this and these sort of simple things, they do have a place. What they don't do though is they don't make your technique any better, but what they potentially do is that they help you solve a short-term problem. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's video. One of the hardest things for amateur golfers is to compress the golf ball, okay, and also to get the club face square. Now, compression really is just that sort of sound, which is kind of, yeah, sort of like that, as opposed to this kind of sound, which is a bit more sort of like that. The latter one, when I hit it, obviously I didn't quite hit it as hard, but it's hit with more of an open face. When you hit the ball with more of an open face, you're not going to basically get that sort of sound as compressed as you would like, as opposed to if you hit it with a more squaring face. Compression is just a term that we use, although the golf ball is always being compressed. We can also just use better ball striking, or if you like, de-lofting the club. So if we kind of understand that then, and we kind of know that technically there might be a few things you'd have to do to be able to learn that, there is a shorter answer that can sometimes help you out, particularly if you're fed up of missing down the sort of right-hand side for a right-handed golfer. And that's to sort of change your approach towards how you're holding the club in the setup position. So what tends to happen is when golfers hold the club, so I'm going to do this both with the driver and a 7-iron, but I'm going to start with the 7-iron, is, should we say, a pretty traditional setup would be the golf ball would be located anything between centre of left of centre. I personally have it further forward, and then the idea of the club face would point pretty much towards your target, as the handle of the club might start on the instep of your left thigh, so it starts slightly ahead of it. Okay, now as I then am going to hit the golf ball, I'm obviously going to get my hands further forward, and I'm going to rotate the back of that, my lead hand square, so that's going to give me that ability to compress the golf ball. But that takes obviously a level of skill and technique to be able to do that. So one of the things that you could experiment with is you could start by keeping your stance the way it is, keep the ball position exactly the way it is, but start with a little bit more shaft lean. Okay, so if you started to introduce a little bit more shaft lean, so theoretically you're de-lofting the club in the original position, and then take hold of the club, okay, this will produce a slightly stronger grip, because like I say, instead of me gripping it this way, I'm going to be gripping my lead hand on top this way, so it will produce a slightly stronger grip. And obviously what it is doing is therefore, theoretically the club face is going to be more closed than when you're sort of like so. But as I said, it's an option for you. It's an option for you from this type of position to then sort of pick it up and then drop it down on the back of the golf ball. And this type of thing might be very beneficial, like I say, as a short-term result, particularly with driver. So when it comes to driver, the club face, should we just say, becomes even more important to have that ability to control. When we're using things like our wedges and clubs with more loft, we can kind of get away for, should we say, just less club face control, which is why a lot of amateur golfers struggle with the driver. One, because it's longer, and two, because if you can't control the club face, you'll get exposed a little bit more. So again, you of course can do the same thing. I take my setup position, the ball would be located on the instep of my lead ankle. Instead of me holding the club like so, I'm just going to position it. So again, it falls slightly in front or in level with the golf ball. And then from there, you're just going to obviously make sure that the club face is staying square towards your target as you take hold of the golf club. Now what you're going to find is, of course, you've de-lofted the club. So as you're looking at that club now, it's going to look considerably less lofted than when you held it this way. But like I say, what it is going to do is it's going to keep the club face a lot squarer in the backswing, and it's probably going to increase your chances of delivering it square in the downswing position. So you would do this type of thing, and you would experiment with this type of thing down the driving range, and you're going to hit some very, very different shots. Because as we said at the beginning of the video, you hit the ball with less loft and more compression, you're going to sound great, it's going to go further, and it's going to be much better, and it's going to excite you. I suppose the question is, does it have any sort of ramifications? And well, unfortunately, the answer would be, again, yes. And so it's hiding your sort of inability to square the club face by understanding how your hands and arms are supposed to move at the bottom part of the swing. But where it probably does still have a place is, like I say, one, short term, if you're fed up of missing shots off towards the right hand side or sick of poor iron shots, it definitely will help you out. And plus, if you do start with the club looking a bit more this way in the setup position, if you sort of returned it where you sort of flip at it, then you're going to miss a lot of shots for a right-handed golfer left, and quite volatile left. So there is a possible argument that by continuing with this a little bit in practice, you'll sort of learn how to get those hands a little bit more in front of the golf ball. But again, eventually, I suppose the detrimental thing, and again, where the ramification really comes in, is hypothetically, if you adopt this setup position and you end up with better technique, what will happen is you'll just take all the loft off the club, so you won't launch the ball as high, and therefore you'll lose distance that way. So again, I would still class this very much as it has a place in the here and now to get you around a golf, build up some confidence, whilst you're then working on stuff at home to improve your correct release and understanding. See you soon.